Kia ora koutou katoa. I'm Emma from Charities Services, and I'm an advisor on the capability team. Thanks for taking the time to join me today for this webinar before registering as a charity. To find out when the next webinar is, please sign up for our newsletter on our website and follow us on the Charities Services Facebook page. This webinar is being recorded, and we'll send you an email in the next few days with a link to this recording and links to any resources we discussed today. Please feel free to share the recording with anyone who couldn't attend today. We're just going to talk a bit about logistics here and let you know how the webinar will run. Make sure your computer's sound is unmuted, and if you have echoing or distortion, then you should try using headphones instead, as this may help. If your sound is cutting out, then check your internet connection and maybe turn it off and on and see if that helps. This is a listen-only webinar. Click on the questions box to ask questions and not the chat. If your question doesn't get answered during the webinar, please email us at info@charities.govt.nz. In this webinar, I'll talk you through the things you need to know before registering as a charity, including what a registered charity is, what a not-for-profit is, how to decide if being a registered charity is right for your group, the benefits and obligations of being a registered charity, what you'll need to register, and tips for your application. We'll finish with some time for questions, and we'll have one of our senior registration analysts, Lucy, sitting in with us to help answer them. Feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box anytime throughout the webinar. First off, let's talk about what a registered charity is. To call yourself a registered charity, you must be registered with Charities Services. To be able to register, your organisation has to have a purpose which is charitable, which I'll talk more about later. Registered charities are those that have been through an application process and are listed on the Charities Register. They're regulated by Charities Services and must meet their obligations under the Charities Act 2005. I'm just going to talk a bit about the Charities Register, as it's something I'll mention a lot throughout this webinar. The Charities Register is a publicly available database of information about registered charities. The register holds information about more than 27,000 registered charities in Aotearoa, as well as information about charities that have been deregistered. Once you are registered as a charity, a summary of your group's information will be available on the register. Anyone can search the register and find information about your charity. The public, funders, stakeholders, and others use the Charities Register to make better informed decisions about charities they may wish to support financially, volunteer for, or whose services they may wish to use. Before I dive into what it means to be a registered charity and how to apply, I want to briefly let you know about your other options, in case you decide that being a registered charity isn't right for your group. Did you know that your group doesn't have to be a registered charity to carry out their charitable purposes? There are over 115,000 not-for-profits in Aotearoa, and over 27,000 of them are charities. Like registered charities, not-for-profit groups in Aotearoa can be set up for all kinds of reasons and purposes. The difference between not-for-profits and registered charities is that charities are regulated by Charities Services, and they must operate in accordance with the Charities Act. Not-for-profits are not governed by one act. However, depending on if a not-for-profit group is incorporated or not, they will have different legal obligations under different acts. Many groups will decide not to register as a charity and instead operate as a not-for-profit under an incorporated or an unincorporated structure. Registered charities have a lot more obligations than not-for-profits, and these obligations are one reason you may decide not to register as a charity. We'll talk more about these obligations later, but first I'll talk very briefly about different structures. When groups first start out, they must decide what type of structure they will be. There are many different types of structures that groups can choose. The pie chart on screen shows the most common types of structures of charities listed on the Charities Register. You could decide to form an unincorporated or an incorporated group in the form of a society, a trust, or a company. We recently presented another webinar on the different structures a group can be. It's called Societies, Trusts, and Companies. What structure is right for your charity? We'll include a link in the handout we'll send out after this webinar. One of the most important things to consider when you start a group is if you should register as a charity. Some groups may register as a charity as soon as they start. Some groups may never register as a charity, and other groups may operate for some time before deciding if becoming a charity is the best option for them. Most groups start off with an idea to provide some sort of support within their community. Once you've come up with an idea, ask yourself, what's our purpose? It's really important to be clear about your purpose from the very beginning and to keep referring back to it throughout the process. Ask yourself, what is the need we're trying to help? Who are we trying to support? How will we go about meeting our purposes? Now that you're really clear on your purpose, the next step is to ask yourself, will being a registered charity help me achieve my purpose? Many people assume that registering as a charity is the next step after coming up with an idea, but it might not be. Running a registered charity isn't just about delivering services to help your community. There's a lot more involved. Registering and running a charity takes time, money, skills, and resources. So it's important to consider if registration is the best way to achieve your purpose. You may want to see if there are other groups, locally or nationally, that are doing the same thing and supporting the same people. Search the Charities Register for groups with purposes similar to your own. If you do find other groups with similar purposes, it may be worth considering if supporting an existing group will be more effective than starting a new one. You may also want to research fund-holding organisations or donor-advised funds. Fund holders are usually registered charities that hold money for groups that don't have their own structure. Fund holding allows groups to carry out their purposes without having to register as a legal entity or as a charity, or having to open a bank account. The Gift Collective is an example. If your intent is to give out money, consider setting up a donor-advised fund with a local community foundation or the Gift Trust. This allows you to direct giving to the community without the administration of setting up a charity. In Aotearoa, there are more than 27,800 charities. That's approximately one charity for every 180 New Zealanders. This means that charities are having to compete for a limited pool of resources, such as donations from the public, volunteers, and grants and funding. So it's worth checking if you can work with a group already carrying out a similar purpose. Before registering as a charity, you should know what you'll gain from having charitable status and also the obligations that come with it. So let's start with some of the key benefits of being a registered charity. Firstly, you can call yourself a registered charity. Registered charities enjoy improved trust and confidence from the public, as being registered with Charities Services will add a layer of transparency to your charity. As a registered charity, you will receive tax exemptions from income tax for all or most of your income. Registered charities are also likely to be eligible for donee status if their funds are used mainly in New Zealand. Donee status means that when someone donates to your charity, they can claim back 33% of the donation from inland revenue. Tax benefits are one big reason that groups decide to register with Charities Services. However, did you know that your group may be able to receive some tax benefits without registering as a charity? Inland revenue doesn't require not-for-profits to pay income tax on the first $1,000 of income. Before registering, we recommend looking at Inland Revenue's resources about what tax benefits your organisation may be eligible for. Another benefit is that registered charities have increased access to funding, as some funders only fund registered charities. However, this doesn't apply to all funds. Groups that are not charities will still be eligible for some funds that don't require registration with Charities Services. Before registering, you may want to research the funds your group may apply for to find out if they require groups to be charities. All not-for-profits have obligations under the law. Some of these key responsibilities for smaller groups are outlined on a page on our website, Charities Obligations Under the Law. We'll send around a link after the webinar. Registered charities have additional obligations. To register and remain registered, charities must operate in accordance with the Charities Act. Firstly, registered charities must advance exclusively charitable purposes. We'll talk more about charitable purposes later on. All registered charities must submit a set of rules when they apply, and they must operate in accordance with these rules. If you aren't sure what rules are, don't worry, we'll be talking more about them later in the webinar. Once you're registered, you also have to update Charities Services with any changes to your charity's details. You must also provide any information that Charities Services requests about your charity. The last obligation, and also one of the biggest, is reporting annually to Charities Services. Annual reporting is often one of the hardest obligations for charities to meet, and it's the main reason charities are deregistered. So I'm going to spend a bit more time talking about what annual reporting involves. All registered charities must file their annual reporting every year. Annual reporting includes a completed annual return form, a copy of your performance report, and a filing fee. The annual return form asks for information about the people in your charity, your financial position, and your income and expenditure. With your annual return, you also have to file a performance report. All registered charities need to prepare these in line with financial reporting standards. Before registering as a charity, you should be confident that you'll have the time and resources to complete your annual reporting every year. Our resource, Annual Return Checklist for Small Charities, is a good resource to look at before registering to get an idea of what you'll need to do to complete your annual reporting. There are lots of other resources and templates available on our website to help you complete your annual reporting. We really recommend that you check them out before registering, as annual reporting is one of the biggest obligations you'll have as a charity. We'll send you the links to these resources after the webinar. So now that you're aware of the benefits you'll have as a registered charity and the obligations you'll have to meet, you should be able to make a more informed decision about if registering is right for you. Think about what you'll gain from being a registered charity and if these benefits outweigh the obligations. For the rest of the webinar, I'm going to talk about how you can go about registering as a charity. To apply for registration, you can fill out an online application form on our website. The application will ask for a range of details, including those on screen now. For the rest of the webinar, I'll cover some important points of the application and some key issues our staff commonly see in applications. Once you've submitted a completed application, one of the analysts on our registration team will assess your application against the requirements. One of the things they will look at is charitable purpose. Many groups have worthy purposes, however, they may not meet the legal definition of charitable purpose. There are 4 categories of charitable purposes: relieving poverty, advancing education, advancing religion, and other purposes beneficial to the community. You must outline your charitable purpose in the online application and also in your rules. A common issue that our analysts see in applications are charitable purposes that are too vague. Make sure that the way you describe your charitable purpose is clear. Your purposes need to be specific enough for us to confirm that your charity will be advancing only charitable purposes. If your purposes aren't specific, our analysts will need to go back to you for more information, so make sure your purposes are clear. As an example, a charity is set up to support families in poverty by providing them with fruit and vegetables and healthy cooking classes. A purpose to raise standards of life would be too broad, as it could encompass activities that aren't charitable. Instead, their purposes could be to relieve poverty and advance health for local families. There's plenty of information on our website that can help you write and describe your charitable purpose, and we'll make sure that we send these links around after the webinar. To meet registration requirements, your purposes must provide a benefit to the public that is considered charitable. Our analysts often see applications with purposes that don't benefit the public or a wide section of the public. For example, you couldn't provide financial assistance to individual artists. However, you could provide art classes for the public. Your purposes won't be considered charitable if you aim to provide benefits to an individual or a closed group. You can find more examples of what is and isn't considered charitable on our website. Our analysts will also look at your charity's activities to ensure they support your charitable purposes. The application form asks you to explain the activities your organisation will carry out to advance your purposes. It's important to give plenty of detail about what you do, how you do them, where you do them, and who benefits. Don't just restate your charitable purposes in the activities section. Instead, you should explain how you achieve these purposes through the things that you do. When you apply as a charity, you'll be asked to include information about your officers. Officers are the people involved in governing your charity. For trusts, your officers are your trustees. For other groups, your officers are all your governing board members and people in a position of significant influence. For example, they could be your chief executives, your general managers, or your financial controllers. We'll check your rules to see if they specify how many trustees or governing body members you must have. You must certify the same number of officers that are specified in your rules. We will also check to ensure that you have certified each of your officers. Officer certification confirms that an officer of a charity is qualified. There are several things that disqualify people from being officers, including being bankrupt, being under 16, having a conviction for dishonesty, as well as other disqualifying factors which you can find on our website. Before you apply for registration, Ensure that all your officers are qualified. If you have a disqualified officer, we can grant a waiver in exceptional circumstances. You can apply for a waiver when you update your officer details. When you apply for registration, you must also send us your charity's rules. Your rules set out your charity's purposes, what you do, and how you operate. Trust deed, constitution, or charter are all different names for your rules. The wording of your rules needs to meet some requirements for your group to be registered. It pays to know what you should include before you apply. To be registered as a charity, your rules must include clauses that prevent individuals from profiting. Your rules should include a clause that shows that any income or advantage must be used to advance your charitable purposes. You can still pay reasonable salaries to staff or trustees, or pay for goods and services from companies, but only for services connected to advancing your charitable purposes. If the organisation wants to make payments, it must clearly express this in the rules and show that members cannot influence decision-making about payments to themselves. Also, all payments must be reasonable and at market rates. Most charities also need to include a clause in their rules that states what will happen when the charity stops operating or winds up. The clause must show that when your charity stops operating, it will direct all of its remaining assets to charitable purposes or charitable organisations. The most common type of winding up clause will say something like, surplus assets will be applied to charitable purposes in New Zealand. We recommend that you also include governance clauses in your rules. They're not required for all charities, although most charities that are incorporated societies or trusts do need to include most of these details. Governance clauses are also important to keep your charity safe. These should outline how your charity will be managed and could include clauses about how to recruit and appoint officers, what officers can and can't do, how decisions will be made, how disputes will be resolved, and how conflicts of interest will be managed. A conflict of interest is when a person's personal loyalties could affect their ability to make decisions in the best interest of their charity. Our registration analyst will check your application for any potential conflicts of interest and if your charity has measures in place to manage these. For example, your rules should state what may be considered a conflict of interest, how conflicts of interest will be recorded, and that officers with conflicts cannot be involved in particular decisions. You can find examples of private profit, winding up, and governance clauses on our website. So that brings us to the end of this webinar. You should now have a better understanding of what you need to know before registering as a charity. If you still need someone to talk you through registering as a charity, then you can book into a one-on-one clinic on our website. We can either have a Zoom meeting with you or call you. If you have a general question where you aren't sure how to book online, then you can also email us at info@charities.govt.nz. So we've got some time for questions now, and we have one of our senior registration analysts, Lucy, sitting in with us to help answer them. So feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box now. We've had some questions sent in to us ahead of time, so I will answer those first. If we don't have time to answer your question today, then feel free to email us at info@charities.govt.nz and we'll be able to help you with any questions that you have. So firstly, we had a question sent in that is, Is it necessary or recommended for trustees of a Tier 4 charity to become a registered trust board? So this question is related to structures and if it's necessary for trusts that are registered charities to also be incorporated charitable trust boards. There's no requirement for registered charities to also be incorporated, so this decision is up to the individual group. But the main advantage of being incorporated is that your trust board will have separate legal status. This means that it's not your trustees who personally enter into any obligations for the group, but the incorporated group itself. This means there's less personal risk to the individual trustees of charitable trust boards. Also, incorporated groups will have more opportunities for funding, so that's another benefit. We do have a webinar on legal structures that we presented a couple of months ago. So we'll send a link around to that after the webinar. We recommend that you check it out to help inform your decision. So there are some questions coming through now. Firstly, is there a minimum number of officers required? Lucy, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So we don't require you to have a specific number of officers unless the rules specify how many you must have. And you should check your charity's rules to see if they specify how many trustees or governing body members your charity needs to have. We also recommend that charities have at least 3 officers. However, this will vary depending on the size of your charity, the skills and experience needed in the governing group, and your rules. I see that there's another question. We are a charitable trust looking to become a registered charity. Should we get our rules updated first and approved by Societies Registrar before applying to? And in response to that, I would say that the requirements of the Companies Office legislation are different from the requirements of the Charities Act. So if you were wanting to apply, you might want to make sure that your rules meet requirements with Charities Services first before updating anything with the Companies Office. So I guess in short, I would recommend updating your details with the Companies Office after applying to register as a charity.
There's another question come through. Are there penalties for late filing? So that's related to the annual reporting obligation. So you have to submit your annual reporting within 6 months of your balance date every year. We send updates and reminders regularly before that, so you will be aware of when those are due. If you don't file for 2 years in a row, then that is when we'll email you letting you know that you are overdue and at risk of being deregistered. And if you continue to fail to file, then that is when you will be deregistered from the register. But there's plenty of help available, and we'll send you plenty of reminders to let you know that you're late and help you as much as we can to make sure that being deregistered isn't a reality. There's another question come through. What is the legal liability for the trustees of a charitable trust? Lucy, would you be able to take that one?
Sure. So the trustees of the charitable trust have what we call fiduciary obligations, and this means they are legal obligations to act in the best interests of the beneficiaries of the trust, which in this case is to act in the best interest of the charitable purpose. Now, the Trust Act 2019 codifies or sets out what the obligations of the trustees are, and there's a number of them, but some examples of them are, prudent spending in the interest of the charitable purpose, not providing any private benefits to the individual trustees, and other things like that. But if you have further questions on that, feel free to email us and we can get back to you.
I've seen another question come through. Is it required for trustees to change every so often, or can the same trustees stay for a longer period of time? In small communities, it is often too difficult to find new trustees. Lucy, would you be able to take that one?
I would say this depends on your rules, essentially. Whatever your rules state, sometimes it'll say the trustees will act for X amount of years and then we'll have new ones, but it just depends on how you decide to govern yourself, essentially.
Can a group register to provide services to a specific ethnic group or community? Lucy, would you be able to take that one?
Looks like we've just answered that to the person asking that, but just for everyone else, the answer is yes, you can provide services for one kind of ethnic group.
We've had a question come through. What other clauses should I include in my rules? So I can take that one. Generally, rules should include your legal name, your purposes, where you operate, the powers of your governing body, how meetings will be run, financial information, how your rules can be changed, as well as the clauses we've talked about earlier, and more. Legal requirements for rules will depend on the structure of your group. And so we recommend checking out MBIE's Constitution Builder if you're an incorporated society, or the Sample Trust Deed on Community Net Aotearoa if you're a trust. Both are really great templates to help you write your rules.
And we've had another question, and it's, can an officer of a charity be employed by the charity, and can they get wages? Officers can be employed by the charity if it's in connection to the charity's work. Payments have to be reasonable and arm's length, and this is part of what Emma discussed in the webinar. Also, there needs to be measures to ensure that the person being paid can't influence the nature or amount of the payment that they receive by the trust. And this could also be, depending on how your rules are formulated, if you are a trust, it'll be implied into the obligations as trustees. And if you are a society or a company, you'll need to have specific rules about this in your rules document.
Thanks, Lucy. We've had a question, how do I search the Charities Register for groups doing similar things? So using our advanced search is the best way to search the register for groups with similar purposes. You can search for charities by their activities, their beneficiaries, their sector, their sources of funds, and more. If you're having trouble using the advanced search, we do have a guide on our website that outlines how to search for specific things. It's called Charities Data How-To Guide, and you can search that on our website.
And we have another question, and it's, how long will it take to approve a new charity registration? If a charity gets registered halfway through the financial year, is the annual return for the period after the register or the whole financial year? So in relation to the first question, the general, I think at the moment, the general time frame we are sitting at is about 8 weeks. However, each application is registered on a case-by-case basis, and some might be really complex and could take longer, and some might not take that long. And just to clarify, it is an 8 weeks queue for the amount of applications that we have to get through, but not necessarily how long it'll take once we get to the application. And to answer the second part of the question, if you are registered, do you have to file for the full year or just from the date that you're registered? So when we register a charity, we backdate the registration date to the day that we received a completed application. And the charity will be required to file for the period effectively that it was registered from. But if the registration date is less than 3 months from its end of financial year, then we will provide an exemption on that, and you won't have to file until the next year.
So we've had a question about the $1,000 income deduction for not-for-profits and how you can access that as a not-for-profit. So this is something you apply for through IRD, and to qualify, IRD will have to accept that your group is a not-for-profit. You'll need to supply your rules, and they'll need to show that your group doesn't exist to make a profit. So you'll need to send your rules along with some other information like your IRD number and details of how you operate to IRD. All right, if there are any other questions that you have, send them through now. We've had a question about what other tax benefits are available for not-for-profits. Some not-for-profits can also be eligible for an exemption for residents withholding tax, and that also you need to apply for that with IRD. So we recommend checking out the information on their website first. All right, it looks like our time is almost up. So if we haven't had a chance to answer your question, please email us at info@charities.govt.nz. And if you want to attend future webinars, we advertise them on Facebook and in our newsletter. Remember to like the Charities Services Facebook page and subscribe to the Charities Services newsletter, which you can do from our website. And thank you for attending today, and thank you for the work you do in your communities. We'll send you a link to the webinar recording and links to the resources we talked about today. Feel free to share it on with any who couldn't attend today. Enjoy your afternoon. Ka kite anō.